You know how much music means so much to so many people differently. Such wealth. And in fact, it brings us to the agreement to disagree. It's easy to reject alterity and have opinions, regardless how important it is. But it's so nice when you can surrender with admiration for another way than the one you think is the one. All these are easy words, but if you really put it to the task, you realize that it's not that everything is relative, it's that everything is absolute. Because it's only in the hands of the beholder during the moment of ephemeral jubilation while they play that you enter in their virtual world, in their daydreaming of the piece, in them projecting themselves through the piece for the atmosphere that they like to bathe in through it. It's an immersion of intellectual and emotional capacity, even if the piece is so famous that you already have preconceived ideas about it, especially when you age. Though I must say that when one is young, one is even more drastic with one's choices and opinions, which is a way to build your own self, and that's very healthy. But to remain tolerant, open-minded, and accepting that some of the most deep convictions of yours can be put in question by another person's point of view of the same section of a piece. Said like that, it doesn't sound very dramatic, meaningful, or drastic, but in fact, it leaves deep grooves inside. I think the capacity to criticize is as transformative as the capacity to admire. And I find that sometimes we're afraid that if we like something a way that is different from ours, it will bring us to lose some of our convictions. And ultimately, when we play, we constantly evolve because you cannot play twice the same piece, really. Even if you have the intention for it, the structure, the organization, the tempo, the phrasing, the pedaling, the acoustics, the instrument, more or less in control of all of these ingredients towards producing this moment of dreamed life experience to go through a movement, a section, or a piece. And I find it very healthy to decide at the end, even if you were convinced by the other way than one's own way, I think at the end it's good to go back to your way. And somehow the brain, the impressive capacity of the brain to it's very flexible, to adapt, adjust. You integrate certain things you've heard, perhaps not even consciously. When I was young, I thought the old generation had decided more or less objectively how things are replayed, at least in tempi or some other objective facts. But in fact, even the same tempo with a different touch from a different pianist takes another dimension. The texture settles so much more subtle ways of understanding or hearing an accompaniment pattern or a secondary voice. In fact, the playing of each person is the conviction coming from their hearing of the reading from the text. The text comes alive in your inner ear and you project it and you monitor it through your outside ear when you play. And because you're dissatisfied often with what you produce compared to what you daydreamed ahead, you start again and you're not satisfied with yourself. And in fact, being unsatisfied with oneself helps being unsatisfied with others. And I am very deeply moved to hear how an identical instrument played by different people for the same piece brings completely different flavors of the texture. And of course, there is the factual, slower, less slow, faster, calm, rubato or straight tempo, little hairpin or bigger element of expressive build up towards a climax, justifying the phrasing, the system, the group of the line. In other words, you have to reach a certain degree of disbelief in your listener, who, besides their own critical thoughts, have to just accept being retold the story through you and believe in it, not because of you, but because of the piece revealing itself through you, but it's not you. In fact, that's the major difference with organists, who you rarely see play, given the way the instruments are built in the structures where they are concert halls or, of course, churches. So you're used to hear the organ more than watch the organist, which is a distraction, especially with the feet, but not only. Perhaps sometimes watching the pianist play is a certain distraction, or makes you believe that you like it better because you feel like this artist is immersed in the piece playing. And there could be an earthquake around or something, stop electricity, something, but he or she will go on because they're invested in this secondary imaginary life that is more real, like dreams are real while you sleep. And there is an alternative reality, call it escapism. And why not? It feeds the beautiful irrational portion of our yearning beings, soul, faith. In fact, in both cases, you project yourself towards something you wish, which you don't reach. But on the way, you better yourself serving it. And if in turn you teach it while you are in this trajectory of your life, then I think that it gives even more meaning for your passage on earth as a musician. You're one more chain piece that connects to the next. Oh yes, some people break the chain to rebuild a new ring chain because they dislike everything the way it was done before. Takes guts, and sometimes it's too superficial to be meaningful. Sometimes the real differences or changes of thinking, hearing a piece are within details that are just perceptually hinted rather than, conviction speech, rather some kind of innuendo that touches a spot that is so special. Finishing in major and minor piece, how much do you delay the note or not? You know, they know if they know the piece. We all know that it's going to finish in major. If you're faking a surprise, it might be literally that, faked. If you're really letting yourself, once you've practiced it, but let yourself drive by the flow of the events, you bring it to shore in major in a way that is as if it was always meant to be. Of course, if you do that with music, which wasn't written, people don't know what to expect. So they recognize the effect of the Picardy third, but they don't know if they have to expect it. And some people find it cheesy. Why? Because I think sometimes the effects by the composer's choice of a, let's say, minor major contrast are sufficient that they don't need to be delayed, to be savored, to be cherished. In a way, then they say you play affected. But if you don't play it with a little delay, because it's not the daily ending, it's some special ending, even if you've played it before, you have to find the right transposition of your level of intensity in the piece and letting the piece make its groove and reach the listener. So to a certain extent, that's what I understand is the craftsmanship. Trust your masterpiece. Don't comment it while you play it. It doesn't need your comments. But at some point, a hint of your comment reassures the listener that we are in agreement about this modulation or section. It's almost like acquiescing and saying, oh yeah, I agree. It means to me too. Or it's so obvious, you don't have to mention it. It's in the text. It's like the words have music from the vowels that they produce. You could almost sing them when you speak. But you don't really sing them. You just really sing them. Then it's operatic, immediately artificial. But artificial is art. Recreating life artificially. To the point to which you mistake it for the truth. Is it daydream? Is it dream? Is it real? Do we go from one art to the other and the storytelling is more suggested and hinted than explained? In a gaze, more than in a word? If you hear somebody play or you hear somebody play, in some you indulge, in another you hold from indulging, but you gain the direction of the line. So it's more about the meaning of the words in a sentence, in a structure that would be a stanza, for instance, in a poem. While each individual word in the poem is chosen for its meaning as well as for its resonance, so the music and the meaning of the word, And here, if you play the same thing without changing the note of the melody, these repeated notes are in lieu of the other notes. Because you know the melody and you feel there's certain intensity and a release after the dotted rhythm. But if you then you have to bridge and you go higher than the first note and then drop. So once you're aware of these patterns of the design, you feel like as if you played in fact the intensity of the sound for a given note that prepares an appoggiatura or reaches a dominant or has a leap that is expressive of a sixth, whatever the seductive aspect of the melodic lines intervals, when you take them off and you repeat it on the same note, you can suggest them by the intensity which you would have put into the leap of the interval, so that when you go back to play it like it's written, in fact, you don't take it so much for granted. Because you were trained to play it on a single note, with each note having the meaning of a leap of a third or a dotted rhythm of a dropping this or rising that. So perhaps then you play the melodic line with the same emotion and passion, but you play it without to be so necessarily descriptive or commenting the beauty of each interval by the extra amount of intensity you'll put into it. That doesn't mean that you like to teach a student to play distance and say everything is repeated notes basically in the melody. No, it's just that this way when you play like it's written, you feel like you appreciate the leap of the sixth compared to the first step motion. And if you had written alternatively only step motions, naturally step motion is more easier, less difficult to play legato singing on the piano, eloquent with rhetoric and a certain conviction of the blossoming of each note in the phrasing, the arched phrasing that brings you from the 10th, from the bass, to the 12th, and then to the 6th, demultiplied, and then foreign note, delayed accacciatura. So you feel like if the composer has embedded the effects in the choice of the pitches, the delay between the pitches, which is dotted, which is released in the 16th, in a way you can be more expressive with less extroverted effects. Sehnsucht, as Beethoven says, see inside, intimate but intense. And then you realize that in the case of this nocturne by Chopin, the different ways that you coat the expression of your melodic line, which is Chopin's, not yours, but you are the one who brings it to life temporarily, is the accompaniment, the pattern that is not in 6/8, unless you bring out every 2/8 to 16th notes or every 3. So you have a different pace of this cascade corresponding or not. So the accompaniment has that subtle unmatching pulse with the right hand. And that is a richness. In Beethoven's 109, a variation in 9/8, the patterns of the accompaniment are 2x3 and not 3x2 as they could have been. But they are so did the composer intend this to be brought up? Probably not. It's the inner beauty, the richness of the texture through the pulse, as well as the design of the accompaniment. So there's such an elegance in this accompaniment. The space, the distance between the 12th and the 3rd. Well, if he had done an Alberti based on Chopin's melody, or something that you make it evolve, brings immediately a sound frame that brings us to think more of earlier music. So in a way the accompaniment dates the piece, but the melodic line seems to be timeless. Even if you do of course it changes character. That's why when you play it like it's written and you play it slower with delay for each meaningful note, where you want to taste each detail, this and that, by delaying it from the bass, somewhat narcissistic playing compared to the meaning rather than the indulging of the detail. Where am I going to D? To B, and then to A natural. Surprise. That's too much. Because the effect is already the fact it's an altered note. Trying to be coherent with a different option of tempo or lack of rubato willingly to gain more direction. So it's eloquent by the meaning rather than by the aesthetic of each chosen note. which you take the time to acknowledge, but then you chop the line. And I think that ultimately this is the richness of interpretation, is that you can be convincing in a different way. Who defines if you're convincing or not? Between a student and a teacher is asymmetrical. Between a jury and a competitor, it is asymmetrical. But it's plural, because there are many people listening to you and perhaps disagreeing for the different reasons from your playing, or agreeing in part for reasons they wouldn't play the way you do, but they find it interestingly elegant, or you can call it lighter or fresher. And then if you do with more rubato and slower tempo and more hairpins in the expressive devices, you can say, yes, it's perhaps too much for some, not enough for others. Then somebody is the keeper of the good taste and somebody is accused of bad taste. But in fact, it's beautifully convincing both ways, even if you have your conviction that when you played, you wouldn't do that, at least not now. Perhaps later, taking that in account. I think it's the fierce energy of conviction without the stubbornness to accept the alterity of the beloved piece. Because if it's just for any piece that you don't play, you feel less involved. But if you really have gone through it in your life, you have built some convictions from the playing, from the hearing, from the recording, from the teaching of it, and all of a sudden somebody else brings you another aspect of it, regardless if you can define if it's legitimate, illegitimate, correct or wrong according to this objective written score or manuscript fact or edition. But let's put this aside and just let the intuitive energy of the inspiration be the judge for the performer to perform as they do on the spot, perhaps a temporary conviction compared to another time where they would play differently with the conviction, because it means to them no matter what, even if it reveals itself differently. And I think that it's a very humbling experience to hear how differently somebody else can love and bring people to love the piece that you know another way, or you thought was the only way. It's true meditation on alterity.